You have been talking to yourself your entire life. Right now, as you read this, there is a voice in your head processing these words, commenting on them, probably already forming an opinion before you finish the sentence. You didn't choose to turn it on. You can't turn it off. And if you try to stop it right now, to make your mind completely silent for just 10 seconds, you will almost certainly fail. So here's the question nobody actually asks. Who is talking? Because if you are the one listening, then who is the one speaking? The answer is not what you think, and it will change how you understand every thought you have ever had. Most people assume the inner voice is just thinking, that it's you processing the world, narrating your experience the way a camera records a scene. But neuroscientists have spent decades studying this phenomenon, and what they've found is far stranger than that. The voice in your head is not a single thing. It is not one unified process happening in one place. It is the output of multiple competing systems running simultaneously inside your brain. Systems that often disagree with each other, that produce contradictory impulses, that are trying to solve completely different problems at the same time. What you experience as your inner voice is not the source of your thinking. It is the surface, the part that becomes conscious. Underneath it, the real processing is already done before you ever hear the words. In the 1970s, psychologist Bernard Bars developed what he called global workspace theory. The idea was that consciousness, including the inner voice, functions like a broadcasting system. Dozens of specialized unconscious processes run in parallel, competing for access to a central workspace. The ones that win that competition get broadcast across the brain and become what you experience as conscious thought, as the voice in your head. The ones that lose stay unconscious. You never hear them, but they are still running, still influencing your behavior, still shaping what eventually gets broadcast. Your inner voice is not generating your thoughts. It is announcing the winner of a competition you were never aware was happening. This has a name that most people have never heard. Psychologist Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan has spent years studying what he calls the chatter, the near constant stream of inner verbal activity that runs through the human mind. His research, published across multiple papers and consolidated in his 2021 book on the subject, found that the average person spends between 60 and 80% of their waking hours engaged in self-referential inner speech, not thinking about problems, not planning, talking to themselves about themselves, replaying conversations, rehearsing future interactions, judging their own performance, running an almost continuous internal commentary on their own existence. And critically, this chatter is not neutral. It has measurable effects on stress hormones, on decision-making, on physical health, on sleep quality. The voice in your head is not just an observer. It is an active participant in your biology. But here is where it gets genuinely strange. Because the inner voice is not just one voice. In 2011, psychologist Charles Ferneyhoff at Durham University proposed that inner speech exists on a spectrum. At one end is what he calls expanded inner speech, fully formed sentences with a clear speaker and a clear listener, the kind of internal monologue most people are familiar with. At the other end is condensed inner speech, fragments, impressions, emotional tones, half-formed words that carry meaning without fully articulating it. And between those two poles, Ferneyhoff documented something that most people recognize immediately when they hear it described. Dialogic inner speech, a conversation, two or more distinct voices inside your own mind, taking different positions, arguing, questioning, responding to each other. Not a sign of disorder, not unusual. The normal baseline experience of a significant portion of the population. The voice in your head is sometimes not even a single voice. It is a committee. And you are not always the chair. The neuroscience behind this becomes even more unsettling when you look at what the brain is actually doing during inner speech. Researchers using fMRI imaging have found that when you talk to yourself internally, your brain activates not just the language production areas you would expect, Broca's area, the motor cortex regions associated with speech, but also the auditory cortex, the part of your brain that processes sounds you hear from the outside world. Your brain treats your inner voice as if it were a sound coming from somewhere else. It produces the words and then processes them as incoming audio. You are simultaneously the broadcaster and the audience, the speaker and the listener, which is why, if you pay close attention right now, the inner voice has a quality of being heard rather than simply thought. It arrives, slightly, as if from outside. This has a direct connection to one of the most disorienting experiences the human brain produces. In 2014, researchers at the Loris lab in Belgium studying patients with schizophrenia who experienced auditory hallucinations found that the neural signature of those hallucinations was almost identical to the neural signature of normal inner speech, with one critical difference. In healthy individuals, a predictive mechanism in the brain tags inner speech as self-generated before it reaches conscious awareness. The brain essentially labels it mine before you hear it. In patients experiencing hallucinations, that tagging mechanism fails. The voice is generated internally, but arrives without the self-generated label, so it is experienced as external, as coming from somewhere else. The line between your inner voice and a voice you hear from outside is not a line between two fundamentally different things. It is a single tagging mechanism, one small process that decides, before you ever become conscious of the thought, whether what you are about to hear came from you or from the world. Here is something that almost never comes up in popular discussions of the inner voice. It is not universal. Not everyone has one. In 2020, psychologist Russell Hurlburt at the University of Nevada published research documenting what he called unsymbolized thinking, cognitive processing that occurs without any inner verbal component at all. Some people, when sampled at random moments throughout their day using a method called descriptive experience sampling, report no inner voice whatsoever, not a quiet one, not one. Their thinking happens without words, without images, without any conscious symbolic representation at all. They reach conclusions, make decisions, solve problems, but the processing produces no inner speech that reaches consciousness. Estimates of how common this is vary, but Hurlburt's research suggests it may apply to a significant minority of the population. The inner voice you cannot turn off is, for some people, simply absent, which raises an obvious question about what thinking actually is, if it can happen without any of the things we normally associate with it. There is one more layer to this, and it is the one most likely to change how you move through your day. Ethan Cross and his colleagues at Michigan ran a series of experiments testing one specific variable in inner speech. Not whether people talk to themselves, but how. Specifically, whether they referred to themselves in the first person, using I, or in the third person, using their own name or the pronoun you. The results were striking. When people shifted from first-person inner speech, I am nervous about this, to third-person inner speech, Giannis is nervous about this, their stress responses measurably decreased. Their performance on challenging tasks improved. Their ability to regulate negative emotions increased. The distance created by referring to yourself as if you were another person, someone you were advising rather than someone you were being, produced genuine psychological and physiological changes. The voice in your head responds differently to different pronouns. It is not just narrating your experience, it is shaping it. And you can change how it shapes you by changing something as small as the word you use to refer to yourself inside your own mind. So here is what is actually happening when you talk to yourself. Your brain is running dozens of unconscious processes simultaneously, competing for access to conscious awareness. The winner of that competition gets broadcast as inner speech, as the voice you hear. That voice is processed by your auditory cortex as if it came from outside you. It is tagged as self-generated by a mechanism so small that when it fails, the result is indistinguishable from hearing external voices. It is not always a single voice. It is sometimes a dialogue, a debate, a committee of perspectives that your brain generates and hosts simultaneously. It affects your stress hormones, your decisions, your sleep, your physical health, It is absent in some people entirely, and it responds to the pronouns you use in ways that have measurable effects on your psychology. The voice in your head is not you thinking. It is the echo of processes that were already finished before the first word formed. It is your brain narrating conclusions it had already reached. Which means the question is not why you can't stop talking to yourself. The question is whether the voice doing the talking was ever really you to begin with.